Jumpin In on Manx Radio.
With Howard and Chris Kane.
Hello.
Good evening.
And welcome. And here we are once again on a Friday night Manx Radio, the best in modern and contemporary jazz in Jumpin In with myself, H and Chris, and we're out in the garden, I think.
Yeah, welcome along to this week's show, and as it's nearly the end of the summer holidays and it's also my birthday, we decided to have a party. In this case, a garden party, although you may be dodging the showers for the next few hours. So, H, as autumn beckons, what have you enjoyed in the garden other than the occasional charred sausage this summer? And what keeps you in the summer mood, whatever the weather?
Happy birthday to you. Right, tell you what, I have got a blue sky for you, I got some fuchsia, and how about some blueberry ice cream?
Oh, lovely. And from me, well, we're live, we're not phased, we're hoping the sun will stay on for an Indian summer. To get the party started, how about the brightest and tallest of all the flowers? From his Marciac suite, here's the Winter Marsala Septet with Sunflowers. Nothing like a bit of 5/4 to get things swinging, albeit or slightly uneasily for those of you who can't count to more than 4. Sunflowers from Wynton Marsalis and his septet, and the wonderful Marciac Suite. Another great, another great festival that has been on our to-do list for a number of years.
We still haven't done it.
We still haven't done it, no. Marciac's a small town of some 1,200 people in south France, which since 1978 has been home to the annual jazz festival for 2 weeks in July, where the population swells to around 250,000. And Winford is known as the godfather of the festival, having been a regular visitor since it started almost, a few years in. He runs workshops for young musicians, and he and his septet were playing the year the giant circus marquee, where the main events were held, blew down, but he was again this year in the Circus Marquee building. It still looks like a marquee, but it's a solid building now, and the original tent having completely blown itself away. The album was the 8th bonus volume, which you had to write away and send a ticket in, from Wynton's Swinging into the 21st Century series, and was released in 1999, and then a year later on its own, and is an oral photo album of the beautiful little medieval town. 13 movements, 12 keys, 4 different time signatures, and both of us originally heard it and subsequently bought it whilst browsing in Ray's Jazz Shop when it was in its first iteration, having moved from 7 Dials to the first floor and coffee shop of the old Foyles bookshop. And what a lineup. Wycliffe Gordon on trombone, Wessel Anderson on alto sax, Cyrus Chestnut piano, Farid Barron also on piano, Eric Reed also on piano, Marcus Roberts also on piano, not all on the same tracks, I might add, Victor Goins clarinet, tenor and soprano, Rodney Whittaker bass, Hurlin Riley at the drums, and of course the wonderful Wynton Marsalis and the trumpet.
Winford, I like Winford, you said before. Winford's like a cross
with
between
his brother.
Bramford and Winston. He's a hybrid player.
Will that make him Branton? Yeah.
Okay, well, we're out in the garden. It's a garden party special, so obviously you need a garden. You're on the Isle of Man in the summer, or even autumn or spring for that matter, to a degree. And what flower are you going to see? One of the flowers everywhere, fuchsia. Mix that with a bit of jazz, and what do you get? You get a fuchsia swing song. recorded by the great Rudy Van Gelder in the Blue Note Studios, of course, in December of 1964. I'd only be 2, heavens. Marvellous stuff. Fuchsia Swing Song. That was the track. That was the album that came out in Blue Note, featuring, of course, the great Sam Rivers, such an underrated sax player. And he did play all the way around, but never quite got, I don't know, maybe the adoration that your Coltrane's did and your Sonny Rollins did. And I don't know, you can make the rest of the list. He was always there and he played with Miles and the rest of it. Never quite seemed to get that adoration, but I've always really enjoyed his playing in various settings. There he is in any case with Sam himself on tenor, Jackie Bild piano, the great Ron Carter still playing. We saw him last year, I think it was, London Jazz Festival on bass. And as he was listed in the early days, Anthony Williams. Then he dropped the Ant and just became Tony Williams, or dropped the Ann, I suppose, the brilliant drummer with the second great Miles Davis quartet, of course, on the drums. It's fantastic sound he had on the ride cymbal, so fast and accurate. Wonderful stuff. And yeah, there we go. Bit of fuchsia in the garden, just the thing for a garden party.
Marvellous.
On the Isle of Man.
Make sure you cut it back, though, because it does run away with itself somewhat. Next for me, and the first of 2 visits to Poland, are the Adam Yarsmik Quintet, who formed in 2015 under the leadership of the pianist, composer and arranger, and having won the vast majority of the awards available for jazz in Poland, either individually or collectively, they went on to release their debut album, Euphoria, in 2017. And from it, here's Live in Garden. Live in Garden, or is it Live in Garden, from the Adam Yazmik Quintet. Jacob Lepper on tenor sax, Pavel Parokowski on trumpet, Marciej Kawalczycki on double bass, Pietro Budniak on the drums and on piano, and composing all the tunes, Adam Yazmik. Got a couple of albums out, really enjoyed both of those.
Indeed, very fine indeed. It is Jumpin In with Chris and myself, H. We're out in the garden celebrating his birthday. Happy birthday to you. 21
Happy
again,
birthday to
of
me.
course. And the fact, it might be your last gasp to get out and have a garden party because, you know what, we're sort of vaguely heading into the autumn. Christmas? No, I'm not going to mention. So we're making the most, hopefully, of the last of the good weather, which probably is gone by the time you're listening to this. Anyway, we are, if nothing else, virtually bringing you some great weather out in the garden. We've had some fuchsia, we've had a little bit of a sunflower as well. And what else do you need? You need a blue sky. And here is one, courtesy of Maria Schneider. there we have it, just what you need for a garden party. Blue Sky, or in this case Sky Blue, from the album of the same name by the Maria Schneider Orchestra, which came out a few years back now via her artist share. So she still ploughs this path. I mean, all credit to her in many ways, and that she doesn't want to go down the streaming path of so many others. To the best of my knowledge, she still hasn't, and still when she brings out new albums are all via artist share. So it's a case where she basically gets people to support them. She said, this album was funded by my artist share fan base. My deepest gratitude goes out to all those people whose generous participation at the artist share makes recording at this level possible. And yeah, terrific stuff really, and a wonderful band she's put together. All music composed, of course, by Maria. The recording built largely on commissions in this particular case, she says, and I won't go through the entire orchestra. Steve Wilson taking the soprano sax solos there, it has to be said. Credit to him for that, and you will recognise some of the other names in it. Donny McCaslin's on tenor, the likes of Ben Monder, saw him recently actually with the Bad Plus at the Blue Note in New York on guitar, Frank Kimbrough piano, and Clarence Penn at the drums. Always great stuff, any of Maria's. Not always the cheapest albums to get hold of because of the way she does it, but I think she's trying to get people to think about the true value of music and paying the musicians, so all power to her pen.
Indeed so. She has released a few digital, I think, after they've been out for a few years, but they certainly make a great gift for somebody because the presentation is fantastic. Lots of photographs, lots of information. Really good. Now, it's 10 years since we sadly lost one of my favourite pianists, John Taylor. I did feature him on our last show with Aspects of Paragon, which, to my knowledge, has never been released since the original vinyl on MMC Records. Well, John is perhaps best known for his work with Kenny Wheeler, including Azimuth, of course, and his fantastic piano trios, including this one, which has been at the back of a cupboard at Cam Jazz until its recent release. Close to Mars features John with the great Palle Danielson on bass and Martin France on the drums, who both sadly left us last year. So the album is a fine tribute. From it, here's Summer. Summer from the recently released Close to Mars from the John Taylor Trio, and as you imagine, it is sublime. I've read a couple of reviews of it, and one of the reviewers said it's hard to imagine how anyone could give less than 5 stars to this. Fans of John will be delighted to hear there's also going to be a further trio release from a different iteration of the trio with Mark Johnson and Joey Barron. Tramonto was recorded live in Birmingham in 2002 and is due out on ECM next month, but Close to Mars on Cam Jazz is available now.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, as we were just saying, I mean, there will be some reason, whether it's legal, whether it's to do with John's early death, I don't know, but why the music of such quality and such a fantastic lineup sat in the can, or, as you say, lurking in the vaults for so long, who knows?
This being a studio album, not a live recording,
yeah. And, gosh, but it's really good. I must admit, I've thoroughly enjoyed that one as well. Can't recommend it highly enough. But always like John's playing, sadly missed, and amazing to think none of the trio are with us anymore, and I don't think any of them were much older than 60-something, which is all taken far too soon. Right, let's not dwell on the negative. It's all about the garden party today. Where else would you like a garden party other than perhaps the ultimate garden, the Garden of Eden?
Hi, this is Maria Schneider, and you're listening to Jumpin' In with H and Chris on Manx Radio.
Wonderful stuff, just what you need at a garden party, of course, and that's what we're having, a blueberry ice cream. No, actually, blueberry ice cream sounds lovely though, I must admit. Courtesy in that case of Ethan Iverson at the piano, the quirky, wonderful, original piano player of the Bad Plus, now ploughing his own unique furrow on Blue Note and elsewhere, and he's a very big, keen podcaster and such like as well. Do the Math, I think, is one of his... Is it a podcast he has? Something along those lines, taking all sorts of issues of sort of world issues, politics, music, everything all there. I've only occasionally looked at it, but I must go back again. Lee Konitz, the great, now late Lee Konitz on alto sax, Larry Grenadier bass, Jorge Rossi, he's a great character, knocking around for a long time on drums. And before that, we were in the Garden of Eden with Paul Motion, a cracking album, that from 2006 of the same name. Chris Cheek and Tony Malaby saxes, Steve Cardenas, Ben Monda, Jacob Brown guitars, Jerome Harris bass, and of course Paul Motion at the drums.
And it has to be said, we've been very lucky when not in the garden to have come across a lot of these musicians live, and quite often at the London Jazz Festival, which is coming up, of course, later in the autumn. Mark your diaries for November.
Yeah, we've just been trying to think what we'll get to, but we'll get to something.
We'll get to something. And that's about it for this summer party edition. Very sober, I say. No cocktails. I hope you enjoyed it.
In the house.
I also hope that your cucumber sandwiches didn't get too soggy and that the Pimm's hasn't been too deleted by the showers. But before we go, there's just time to squeeze in at least a bit bit of a track, or for the undiluted full track, remember you can listen again on the podcast, there it is, or online, from pianist, cellist and composer Łukasz Pawlik, son of Grammy-winning Polish pianist Władysław Pawlik, with a band including Randy Brecker, Dave Weckl, Tom Kennedy, Gary Novak, and on fine form after his losing the ability to use his hand for a while, Mike Stern. I think you can guess what kind of style we're going to hear. Taken from his 2021 album, Long Distant Connections. Here's something we're all hoping for, an Indian garden summer. Take care. See you in a couple of weeks.
Be Christmas soon.
Bye for now. You did it.